The rift between the two men dates back to the Civil War. By late 1967, the Nigerian Civil War had entered a decisive phase. This was shortly after the Asaba massacre. Federal forces under Yakubu Gowon had pushed Biafran troops out of the Midwest. During their retreat into Onitsha, they had blown up the Niger Bridge in an attempt to slow the advance of the Nigerian troops. At the center of this advance was Colonel Murtalla Mohammed, commander of the 2nd Division. His mission: advance eastward and break into Biafra through the River Niger axis. Key locations were Asaba in the West Bank was under federal control, Onitsha in the East Bank, a Biafran stronghold. Since the bridge linking both banks had been blown up, new orders came from Lagos. Gowon and the High Command issued a cautious directive to Colonel Murtalla to hold position. Do not rush a river crossing into Onitsha. Why? Because Onitsha was one of the most heavily defended Biafran positions under officers like Colonel Timothy Unwatuegu, reporting within the structure of Alexander Madiebo. The eastern bank had defensive trenches, artillery positions, clear visibility of river approaches. Rather, he was ordered to go through a village route in a town called Ida. Murtalla Mohammed promptly disregarded that order. The thing is, he had never considered Gowon a combat-tested soldier. Gowon had never really proven himself. He played no role in the counter-coup that had happened earlier, where Theophilus Danjuma and himself had commanded active roles and only became head of state by sheer providence. He was not next in line in the chain of command. So Murtalla ordered an 8-day artillery bombardment of the city before ordering elements of the 2nd Division to attempt a crossing of the Niger River from Asaba to Onitsha, or local boats and makeshift rafts. Things went wrong immediately. Poor coordination between units, limited naval riverine support, insufficient reconnaissance. Crossing units included infantry battalions under junior officers. Many accounts mention majors and captains rather than top brigade commanders at the crossing point, and the assault was in fragmented waves rather than a unified push. As federal troops attempted the crossing, the Biafran forces were ready. At the time, Onitsha was guarded by the 11th and 18th Divisions. The 11th Division comprised 3 battalions. The most notorious of the 3 battalions was headed by a lieutenant colonel named Joseph Achuzia of the 11th Battalion, a name that would become infamous in that campaign. The 11th Division allowed partial crossings, then opened heavy fire from entrenched positions. It took repeated attempts both in the day and night time for the federal troops to make it to the eastern bank. Once federal troops reached the eastern bank, they were immediately engaged and overwhelmed by machine gun fire from concealed positions, artillery bombardment on crossing points, and encirclement of forward units. Many Nigerian troops became isolated from reinforcements, ran out of ammunition, attempted retreat under fire. Only a few made it back to Asaba. However, Murtalla was undeterred. He made 3 more attempts into Onitsha and was repelled at heavy losses to the federal side. The worst moment came during the retreats. Soldiers tried to recross the Niger in panic. Boats were destroyed or overloaded. Many drowned in the river. The operation collapsed. He finally had to abandon the Asaba crossing and proceeded to Ida that was earlier instructed. However, the 2nd Division of the federal troops, its 6th Battalion headed by Shehu Musa Yaradua and Olusegun Obasanjo, commanding the 3rd Marine Commando Division, crossed through Ida and were able to make it into Awka. The town fell easily. Murtalla would rendezvous with his colleagues in Awka and play a major role in the capture of Onitsha after sustained operations. Murtalla would leave some of his men in Awka and proceeded to Abagana. While in Abagana, his troops ran into heavy resistance fire from the Biafran forces. He would then call for reinforcements from Awka, where his men were engaged in other campaigns. It was at the point of his men coming to meet up with him in Abagana with heavy reinforcement that they walked into the now famous ambush, such that under his command, the federal forces suffered their most horrendous defeat of the entire civil war. They walked into an ambush staged by the same 11th Division of the Biafran side, this time headed by the newly promoted Joseph Achuzia, former commander of the 11th Battalion. Thousands were obliterated and heavy equipment destroyed, an image captured in future Biafran propaganda. At this point, the failure was undeniable. Gowon viewed the operation as reckless and premature. The lack of coordination confirmed his earlier caution. Murtalla commanded 20,000 men at the height of the war, but ended up with only 2,000, having lost most of his men in what was termed reckless engagements. Murtalla Mohammed was removed from active frontline command by Yakubu Gowon and his division reorganized. He would not play any major role until the end of the civil war. Why this moment mattered? This failed crossing did 3 things. 1. Damaged Murtalla's reputation, as he was seen as aggressive but impulsive. 2. Created tension with Gowon, disobedience versus discipline, initiative versus control. 3. Planted seeds of future conflict, a damaged relationship, a wounded ego. This moment contributed to the deeper rift that would later culminate in the 1975 coup against Gowon. In 1975, Gowon had proceeded to an OAU summit in Kampala, Uganda. By the next morning, Nigerians woke up to a new leadership headed by Murtalla Mohammed. Gowon would inherently be exiled in the United Kingdom. Ironically, Murtalla Mohammed would be unalived in a coup deterred by Bukasuka Dinka just 6 months into his administration. Guess who was fingered as the mastermind of the coup? Exiled Yakubu Gowon.